Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today I am joined by returning guest and author Danielle Trussoni to talk about her latest novel, The Puzzle Master. So, welcome back.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's great to be here again. It's been a few years.
A few years. So, yeah, tell our listeners a little bit about The Puzzle Master.
So, the Puzzle Master, once again, sort of incorporates my interest in multiple genres. There's definitely a horror element to the book, but it's primarily, um, I think that the main sort of genre is probably thriller. I don't know. What did you think when you read it? Did it feel like a
Yeah,
thriller to you?
something like, yeah, global thriller, like, I don't know if like
Yeah, kind of.
conspiracy is the right word, but like kind of.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that, like
Yeah.
conspiracy, like dark, lingering,
Yeah.
feelings through in every chapter. But so, the basic story is that there's this ingenious puzzle solver named Mike Brink, and he's called to a prison upstate where a woman has drawn a mysterious sigil or puzzle or this sort of like esoteric design that nobody can figure out. And her psychiatrist believes that this design, if it's unlocked, will give them some clue into her psyche because she's not opening up and telling anyone what happened to her. And so he comes up state from New York City, and just to give you a picture of this guy, this character, his mind works in a way that if he sees a sort of cryptic message or a puzzle, it just like latches onto it and he solves it almost unconsciously, right? Like it's
Mhm.
just that kind of brain. And he meets her, but he can't solve this puzzle. Like he sees it and he's never seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
And then he meets this woman and there's this mysterious electricity between them that he can't explain. And suddenly he starts dreaming about her and he's pulled into her story. And this puzzle brings him into crazy places that I'm not going to really tell people about here because I'd like them to discover those places themselves. But yeah, he goes into places that he would never imagine. Some scary places.
It definitely yeah, it moved so fast from, like, place to place to place. You're like, "Wow, like, we are getting taken on a journey."
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's something that I love to do. I did it less so in my last book, The Ancestor. That was, it pretty much was set in one location, which was up in the Alps. This one, I wanted it to feel fast, and I
Mhm.
wanted it to feel like the reader was just on a roller coaster
Yeah.
going from place to place. But at the same time, you know, because it's one of my books, I wanted there to be this kind of level of melancholy, spooky,
Mhm.
gothic
Yeah.
um, ambiance to it too. So hopefully those two things go together in a way that's unusual and unique.
Oh, definitely. I wanted to ask, are you a big puzzle person?
So um, I love puzzles. I love certain puzzles.
Yeah.
I'm someone that if it's too hard, if it really like takes me a long time, I get frustrated and stop.
Me
To be
too.
totally honest, I'm just like, I don't have time for this. But I do Wordle every day, and
Mhm.
I do crosswords, and
Yeah.
I love jigsaw puzzles. When my brain is sort of overloaded and I don't want to think about anything, I'll go do a jigsaw puzzle. Um, but what really fascinated me about puzzles narratively is how much they are like a novel. The idea that you begin with this kind of um, unclear picture of events, right?
Yeah.
And that putting the picture together piece by piece like a puzzle feels very much to me like what it feels like to read a good book. And so
Oh, for sure.
combining those two things like was when I first came up with the idea when it struck me to have a puzzle constructor as the main character of this book. I was like, that's kind of amazing from a writer's point of view to be able to externalize, right, that
Yeah.
process with a character. So that's what was fun about it narratively.
Oh my gosh, I can definitely see that as a comparison. And then, yeah, when it's done, you step back and you see, like, oh, this piece was actually this all along. And now that looking back, that makes so much sense.
Right. And I think that that's what's fun for readers. I mean, I
Mhm.
think that that's what's fun for puzzle people too, right? Like they
Yeah.
like seeing that what was very confusing and unsolvable and mysterious suddenly makes sense, and it gives us some sense of control over the world.
Yeah. I feel like that with like crosswords, like there's like one you're just not getting, then you solve like another thing and you're like,
Oh,
obviously it's
wait,
this
like,
word.
how did I not know that? Right. You just need some vowels.
And I know you're a big research is a big part of your writing process. And I know you spoke to a pretty highly acclaimed puzzle master.
Right. So after I had a draft of the book and I knew that there was going to be a puzzle savant in the book,
Hmm.
I'm like, oh my God, this is way over my head. I'm not that level of puzzle
Yeah.
solver. I need some help here. Um, so I managed through a friend to get an introduction to Will Shortz, who is the editor of the New York Times Games page and the puzzle master, right? He has a show on NPR called The Puzzle Master, I think,
Oh.
or maybe it's NPR Puzzles or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and he very generously invited me to his home and took me through his puzzle library and sort of walked me through what it was like to be him. Um,
Yeah.
so
Oh my
that was
gosh.
so cool.
What was in his library?
Amazing stuff. Like you walk into his house and there's a glass case
Hmm.
full of like antique puzzles, like with the first crossword, for example,
Wow.
like things like that. And then he took me upstairs and then he has this big library where it's just like chaos, like puzzle books and puzzles and this and that. And um, it was so fun and it's so inspirational. And he and I are actually, I have never, I haven't ever had like an official conversation with him, but we're having a conversation on the 17th of June in Beacon, New York, if anyone is in that area and they want to come see it.
Oh, for the book?
For the book. Yeah, he's
Oh,
actually going to
cool.
come and like have a conversation about puzzles and about fiction and stuff like that.
Oh, that's awesome. Did he give you any tips on like crosswords or puzzle solving in general?
No, I don't
I
think
say that
so.
because I'm traveling
Yeah.
and I always buy like a big giant book of puzzles and I get frustrated with like half of them.
Oh
So,
my God. Yeah, no, I know. I would need so much help
yes.
that I think, he's used to dealing with genius, puzzle
Yeah.
geniuses. And in fact, the book, my book has puzzles in it. And
Hmm.
he's the person that recommended the two puzzle constructors who helped me make them because
Oh, wow.
while I did some of the word puzzles myself, because I have a mind that works that way with language, the number puzzles and the more complicated word puzzles were not mine. I
Hmm.
actually worked with two people and they helped me fit those puzzles into the book.
And then the God puzzle in the book you said is also based loosely on a real thing.
So I love this is my probably my favorite element of the book, or that storyline, right? Like the where
Hmm.
that goes in Prague, and then to Jess Price's experience in that house. Um, so the God puzzle is that puzzle that the puzzle constructor is brought upstate to solve, right? It's this sort of ancient looking sigil, esoteric, occult sort of thingy that he's up against, and it was inspired by the prayer circles of a 13th century Jewish mystic named Abulafia.
Hmm.
And people who like that kind of fiction, who have read like Umberto Eco, for example, I think Abulafia is mentioned in some of his books. I mean, he's sort of a figure, like an occult figure, who was really pivotal in the history of mysticism in general. But
Yeah.
if you go to the British Library, they have this amazing interactive um, collection of Abulafia's prayer circles, or
Oh.
these circles, these mystical Kabbalistic circles. And I started paging through this online and I was like, this is totally incredible. I really want to figure out a way to write about this. And so that puzzle was the circular occult puzzle in the book was inspired by that. And then I had an artist actually make a rendition, right? So it's not Abulafia's puzzles. It's inspired by,
Hmm.
but it looks quite similar.
Oh, wow. It's very interesting. And then going back to research, I know you like to travel a lot and include that in your books. And I know for like a flashback sequence in this, we go to the Jewish quarter in Prague. And I wanted to ask, like, I guess which came first? Like, did you go there and kind of have the seed of an idea, or did you go there kind of already with this idea in mind?
Such a good question. So I went there years ago. And so I've been waiting for a moment to come when I could write about that place. I love Prague, and it's just so beautiful. And that quarter in particular is really fascinating. And so I didn't go back before I wrote it. I, sort of drew from memory and did a lot of research and reading online as well. But yes, so 19th century Prague, there's an episode in the book that happens there that sort of explains
Hmm.
the origin of this puzzle, the God puzzle that we were talking about before, like where that came from and why it has the sort of powers it has in the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, that was so interesting, like where that went. And I know we were talking earlier, but my husband and I we did like Germany and Prague a few years ago. And you're right, it's beautiful there. And actually, we stopped by a restaurant there and it was a golem themed restaurant.
Of course, right?
It
Yeah.
was very
So,
good. We were talking about it last night. We're like, actually, that food was really good. I had like a beef goulash and it was
oh my
delicious.
God, I've had the best food almost ever in Prague, and their goulash and yeah, the beer and all of it. It's just so good.
I know you said you kind of put your like gothic spin on this, and I think we see that in like the Jess Price parts of the story. And so I do have to ask, do you, like me, find dolls to be unsettling?
Oh my God, this is like we could do 2 hours of just this. I feel like so haunted dolls and porcelain dolls and golems and AI, which kind of feeds a little bit in my mind
Yeah.
into that whole idea of a body with a spirit that comes from elsewhere that animates it. All of that is deeply fascinating to me. And for years and years, I wondered why. I think, there is something, and maybe it's with women too, like it has this sort of weird,
Mhm.
almost creepy overtone of motherhood, or of like the dark side of mothering, right? Like there's all
Maybe.
of those elements in it that I find have always left me feeling, as like you said, like kind of like ooh, prickly, like there's something going up my spine when I think of them. And then but I always wondered why. And I wrote this book. There is a doll, a porcelain doll that's at the center of it, that was in 19th century Prague, and then we find it in the contemporary story. And I always wondered, like, after I wrote that, like, where is this coming from? And my mother reminded me that my great grandmother had left her, and that she had given me a porcelain doll from the early 20th century, and now my mom is giving it to me. So I have photographs of this doll, which I'll send you, and it was clearly like sitting in the back of my memory and in my subconscious when I wrote this book. But yeah, I have a fascination with them. And I think that they speak to a lot of anxieties that we have
Yeah.
um, as women. But I think, I think everybody's kind of freaked out by creepy dolls.
There's just something, yeah, like the uncanny valley of them. So this doll's not in your house now, but it will
It's not
be
in my house
soon.
now. Right. I'm in Mexico. So my mom has it at her house. And she's like, I'm going to give this one to you. I'm going to give this to you. I've been carrying it around. Like her great grandmother gave it to her.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah,
Multiple generations down.
multiple generations. Yeah, that's something that I wanted to write about, and I wanted to find a way to write about it where it wasn't the entire story. I think so. I started this book with that doll, right? And
Okay.
the other elements of the book sort of radiated from it, like nesting stories. Um, But when I wrote the Jess Price section of the book, which I thought was going to be a standalone book at first, I realized that it needed more, right? For me, anyway, I wanted to have some sort of larger look at that situation. But I'm glad I was able to, to incorporate it into this book. I don't know if I would be able to write a whole novel just about a haunted doll. I know some people have, and they're very good. And I've in the New York Times book column, um, I've reviewed a few of them, right? I think, Rachel Harrison had a collection
Mhm.
called Bad Dolls that was really great.
Yeah.
Stephen Graham Jones had a book called Mannequin, has a book called Mannequins.
Hmm.
It's definitely like a theme in horror fiction that I find really interesting and and very feminine too, right? Like
Yeah.
there's some elements of horror that are just more female feeling, and that's one of them.
Um, but yeah, definitely felt that gothic, spooky vibes in those chapters.
Yeah, those are some of my favorite.
So yeah, we talked about Mike Brink having this condition where he can like unconsciously solve these puzzles, and it's a was it acquired savant syndrome? And you looked into that. Has it ever manifested in this like puzzle way when you looked into it?
That's such an interesting question. So, for people who don't know what that is, um, acquired savant syndrome is an actual medical condition that is very rare. I think maybe 50 to 70 people in the world have been diagnosed with this, but it's when someone has a traumatic brain injury and it damages the left hemisphere of the brain, and suddenly they have sort of different skills than
Yeah.
what they had before. Some people, I've read accounts where some people have this sort of miraculous ability to play music that they didn't have before. Other people can suddenly speak languages that they didn't know before. There's one story of a guy who was brought up in a helicopter and was asked to look at London and then draw what he saw. And they brought him down, and he drew the city like down to the alleyway precisely perfectly
Oh my
from one
word.
look in a helicopter. I know, it's just totally incredible. And so Mike Brink, this character, he had an accident. This happened to him. It was very scary for him to realize suddenly that he had these different abilities, and what his art is. They're based in patterns,
Hmm.
puzzles. Uh, like he has synesthesia, so he sees colors and over numbers, and it creates a texture that allows him to do things like memorize pie places into the tens of thousands and things like
Nice.
that. These sort of incredible gifts. I have not read of anyone having that particular like puzzle form of savant syndrome. I wonder if it's out there. I should look. I bet if I could, if I did some searching and read some literature about it, I would find someone who has a similar
Hmm.
thing. I have read there's a savant in Japan who I think holds the highest number of pie places, like something like 105,000 pie places he
Oh
can
my
recount
god.
from memory. And that's a kind of savantism. It's different because it's not acquired. What was
Yeah.
really cool for me writing this character is that he was just a normal person, and then he had an accident, and he was different, and the emotional struggle of that, like dealing with that kind of genius and dealing with that kind of ability, and meanwhile trying to function in the real world, was really interesting to me.
Yeah.
So I find him a very rich character, and I'll probably continue to write about him. I'm actually writing another
Okay.
book right now about
That
him.
was my next question, and I was like,
Ah.
maybe I'm going too much into the kind of like Da Vinci Code comparison of it all, but Mike Brink is such an interesting character, like, will we see him again?
I love him so much that I wanted to write it's the first time it's happened that I've loved him, a character so much that I wanted to write another book about that character. So yeah, I'm writing a second one right now that is called The Puzzle Box, and
Okay.
it's in Japan. And it's
Oh.
yeah, it's set in Japan. And I just went to Japan actually in April to do the research for it. So it's coming. I think it's coming next year. I think we're going to be able to publish it next year.
Oh, wow. That's exciting.
I'm excited. It's one of those things, I think, as an artist or a writer, that for me, one of the biggest struggles was finding the next book, right?
Mhm.
And like having many ideas and not knowing which one will work out. And often, I've written like, excuse me, like 100 pages or 150 pages of a book. And it's like, no, this isn't working. I don't like these characters, and the situation isn't right for me. And that's really heartbreaking. So knowing that I like this character is a huge thing for me.
Is this one also going to have, like, supernatural touches? You don't have to say if you're not
Yeah, it
sure
will.
yet.
No, I'm sure.
Okay.
I think my signature, sort of my signature as a writer is having just my editor. described it as an effervescence of the supernatural, right? Like you go in and they're real people and we're in the real world. And
Hmm.
like we don't have people, sort of flying around and using superpowers to blow up buildings and stuff. It's not, or, there's not ghosts or that sort of thing in my books. It's real people in the real world, but underlying it, there's a kind of bubbling up of another world or another power, right? And I just go back to that, even if I don't want to do it, because not everybody loves that, right? um, but I think that that's sort of my signature.
I love that.
Oh, I'm glad. I like it too. And when I find it well, and it's well done, in a novel, I'm really impressed, and I'm in.
Hmm. Definitely. A lot of your stories do focus on like religion, mysticism, the occult in some way. So is that something you purposefully keep revisiting?
So it was very unconscious. Um, and with this book, I sort of really excavated that because I was like, why do I keep coming back to religion, right? Or to mysticism, or as you said, the occult. And I, as a kid, not a lot of people know this about me, but I was in Catholic school from a very young age and was in church 6 days a week. And, I would sort of fantasize about the supernatural stuff, like the angels and the
Mhm.
water turning into wine and people rising from the dead. And like all of that was really fascinating to me. And it sort of fueled my imagination. And then when I was in fifth grade, there was a school shooting at the church.
Oh
And
my goodness.
I know 3 people were killed, the priest, a lay minister, and a janitor. And that violence, I think, overlaid itself in my mind and in like emotionally in my life. I stopped going to Catholic school at that point, right? My parents pulled me out and went to it, and like that was sort of the end of my religious education. And so I think those things over time have kind of macerated and come together because the books that I write tend to be, you know, there's a sort of urgency and violence and darkness around religion,
Hmm.
and I think that that must be where that comes from.
Maybe. So how old were you when that happened?
I was in fifth grade. That was,
Oh
yeah,
wow.
1985. So I was 12.
Wow. It's definitely
Yeah,
old enough for that to become a traumatic core memory.
it is. And, I think for a long time, I just sort of didn't think about it. Um, but that's the really amazing thing about writing is that all of these layers of ourselves are there. Like the doll, this is a memory of this doll is that my great grandmother left is one. Then the religious elements, the violence, the conspiracy, all of these things come from someplace. So, as a writer, it's always fascinating for me to see what comes out,
Yeah.
like, oh, wait, I guess that's part of me too.
It is interesting to like look back and see like what part of yourself you don't even notice or like externalize. You're like, oh, where did that come from?
Right. Completely.
So you mentioned before you are like the New York Times like horror book person. So I know you do like a big column of like stuff you're excited about. Do you have any books you're excited about coming out soon?
So I have a column that's going to be published, I think, in a couple weeks. And I have 2 books. And I hope that this is not, I don't know if I'm not supposed to say it or not, but Eric LaRocca,
Hmm.
he has 2 books that have come out recently that I really love, a collection of short stories and a novel. And who else do I have in that column? Let me think. Oh, Cynthia Palayo,
Hmm.
whose work I've reviewed her work in the past and I really enjoy. I think she's really talented. This book is set in Chicago and it's
Yeah.
kind of have you read it?
I read The Children of Chicago. I have this
Right,
one like on hold at the library. It's the
right.
Shoemaker's
Yeah,
Magician or
yeah, The
yeah,
Shoemaker's
okay.
Magician, exactly. Um, and it's really good. And so, yeah, those are the 3 books that I have recently put in a column that I think are
Oh,
great.
that's really exciting.
Yeah.
One tradition we have on this podcast is to ask our guests for a chilling obsession or like what's something in horror they've been enjoying lately.
So my chilling obsession, we've already sort of talked about it, is haunted dolls and AI. Like AI is really
Yeah.
something that's been on my mind lately.
A lot of people's. I've seen a
Yeah,
lot of stuff pop up recently.
right. So the Bloomhouse movie Megan. Do you know
Hmm.
this? Like that is something that I watched and was just like, ah, love
Okay,
it.
I guess that is a blending of those two things.
Right. It's a blending of a bunch of like things that I'm personally obsessed with, and all of them freak me out. Like I'll be up at 3 in the morning thinking about AI, and then combined with the book I just wrote, like that. And then I'm trying to think. All of the haunted doll movies, right? That from the past. Like I just love them all. I remember when I started telling my agent about the book I just wrote, The Puzzle Master. I told her about this section with the doll, and she's like, "Honey, that sounds like Chucky." And it's not, right? Like it's not. You've read it; it doesn't feel like Chucky, but I feel like there's this. There's something really like chilling and scary about the violence of like strange, violent children
Yeah.
that are not quite real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something
So
just like not quite right about them.
no.
It reminded me of the the Dolville Land. It reminded me of like Claudia from Interview with the Vampire. Like I got a lot of
Mm.
those vibes.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. You got that in with Megan.
Um, a little bit, and in the book with the doll.
Right. That's so interesting because I love that character. I mean, it's such a strange inversion of vampirism that a child would be
Yeah.
stuck, right? And not
Yeah.
developing. And then if you read about where that came from in Anne
Yeah.
Rice's life, right? Like,
I was gonna say that was Anne Rice working through some tough
right.
feelings.
And it turned out to be so true in some ways,
Hmm.
right? Like chilling
Yeah.
and true and very, very much something that speaks, I think, to women, right? I don't know. I just have this, there's something about that. Also, I think from the point of view of a woman, like there's a point in childhood where we kind of lose part of ourselves, right? Like we leave that child, that little girl, and we
Hmm.
become a woman, and it's gone. That innocence and that point is of our lives is gone forever. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's so much there. As I said, I feel like we could have a whole
Yeah.
podcast just about this subject.
Oh, we definitely could. So, the second tradition we have on this podcast is to ask our guests for a final girl song. So, it's a horror movie. You're the last one standing. What's playing?
Okay, so this is me walking away. A building is burning, right? I'm walking into this dark, sort of gothic city, and Aphex Twins' April 14th is playing. Do you know this song? It's
I
just
don't.
very
So,
like, yeah, we should play it. Like, if you could play it, it's haunting. It's very soft. It's kind of music boxy sounding, right?
mhm.
And so yeah, that's my final girl song.
Ooh, okay. Well, I'm definitely adding that to the playlist and hopefully it'll let me post it on Instagram. Instagram is weird sometimes about like music I can find on there for
Okay.
some
There's a
reason.
couple of versions of that.
Okay.
So I think you'll, not just Aphex Twin, but other people have covered it. It's a
Okay.
pretty beloved song. So hopefully you can find it.
Mm, okay. Then most likely. Well, thank you so much for coming on and
Oh my
talking to
God,
me
thank
about the
you.
Puzzle Master.
It's been such a pleasure. I loved coming back, and I hope to talk to you again with the puzzle box
Oh my
next
gosh.
year.
Definitely. We'll make it
Okay.
happen.
All right.
Books in the Freezer is a bi weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on Twitter at Books Freezer Pod, on Instagram and TikTok at Books in the Freezer, or you can send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. If you would like to support the podcast, there are a few ways to do that. One of them is to leave a review on a podcast app like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also check out the show notes for this episode, and that will have links to various affiliate links, as well as the Patreon for the podcast, where you can show your support. There's a $1, $3, and a $5 level with different things at each level. You can find show notes for this episode and all previous episodes at booksinthefreezer.com. That's it for this week. My voice is rough right now, so just gonna sign off. I'm Stephanie. You can find me on Instagram at That's What She Read. That's with 2 A's, or Twitter at lady_Ganya. That's LADY_GAGNON. And see you next time on Books in the Freezer.